Hi, I'm Kristin, a librarian here at Massanutten Regional Library. For this month's craft kit, we are going to be making a little shamrock cross stitch. I asked my mom, Laura here, to teach me a few months ago how to cross stitch so that I could teach you, and she did a pretty good job, and I feel pretty confident teaching you, but I thought I would ask her along just in case I told you anything wrong. So in this month's kit, you're going to have a wooden embroidery hoop. You're going to have a piece of 14 count Aida cloth, which is special fabric for cross stitching on. It has 14 holes per inch so that you can do 14 stitches per inch. You will also have a needle so that you can stitch with it. This is a size 24 tapestry needle, which is what you commonly use for 14 count Aida fabric. You're also going to have two different colors of green DMC embroidery floss. This is a 6-strand floss, which we will get into a little bit more later. I've also included a little bit of white so that you can finish the back of your project all nice and neat and not have ugly green stitches sticking out on the back. And then of course you will have your pattern, which we got from Country Living, who very generously puts free cross stitch patterns on their website. Now at home you're going to need an iron along with an ironing board and a clean cloth. You will need a pair of scissors. These are my cross stitch only for embroidery floss scissors. My mom would be mad if I used them for anything else because you don't want them to get dirty. And you will also need what? Clean hands. So cross stitch patterns are shown on a graph, and each block of color represents one stitch. Some patterns, like our Shamrock, have just plain colored blocks. So as you can tell here, there's a lighter green block and then a darker green block. So there's a key at the bottom that tells you which one is light green and which one is dark green. That will correspond to the numbers on your embroidery floss. In case you get really excited about cross stitching and want to do some more stitching, I want to show you that some patterns, like this example I have of a rose, use symbols to differentiate colors too. So this rose has something like 7 different colors of red, and this one has a little arrow, this one has a little star, this one has a little circle, this one has a little fish. That way you can tell which red is which based on the key that they provide you. Okay, so to get started, we need to get our fabric ready. I've provided you with a good size fabric for our project today, but in general, if you are starting from scratch, you're going to want a piece of fabric that has at least 2 inches extra per side so that when you go to frame it, you have enough room. Our pattern here is about 52 stitches across by 52 stitches down, and we're stitching it on 14 count Aida, so you can easily figure out that that means you need 3.7 inches square of fabric by just dividing 52 stitches by 14 count. So we are starting with this 9 by 9 piece, which should be more than enough for us to fit into our embroidery hoop. Okay, now that we have our fabric ready, there's one more thing we need to do before we get started, which is to iron it. I am not going to iron it now because I don't like bringing my iron to work, but you're going to use just a steam iron on a cotton setting and iron your piece of Aida so it's nice and flat. The one I provided you is rolled up nice and neatly in the tube, so you just want to lay it out and iron it. You should put a clean cloth under it just in case your ironing board is dirty, because you do not want dirty fabric because it just will not look very nice, and it's kind of scary to clean afterwards without, you get nervous about your stitches. Okay, after you've finished ironing, which we have clearly skipped today, you're going to find the center of your fabric by folding it in half and kind of rubbing along to make a crease and folding it in half again. So now you'll have a little crosshair in the center of your fabric that should show you where the center of your fabric is. You're going to put that onto the inside of your embroidery hoop, which is the smaller piece, and then lay the outside of the embroidery hoop on top and kind of push it down. You want to make sure that the fabric stays nice and tight in there, and then once you've got it in, just tighten that screw. Perfect. Now you're also going to want to find the center of your pattern. As I mentioned before, this pattern is about 52 by 52, so if we divide that in half, that's going to be 26 stitches into the middle. So count 26 stitches in one way and 26 stitches in the other way. I can speak English, I promise. And then kind of find where they meet. And I always make a little X to say, okay, here's the middle of my pattern, so I know where to start. And for this pattern, since we know these are all the same color, I'm not too concerned about the fact that I obscured the color. It's always okay to write on your pattern, do whatever you need to do to make it easy for you. When I did this pattern, I actually made little check marks when I finished a row, just so I knew, okay, that row was finished. You can do whatever it takes to make it easier for you. Okay, let's go ahead and get our thread ready. As I said, we are using 6-strand embroidery floss by DMC. It's kind of like the brand of embroidery floss, so most patterns, including our pattern here, are going to have the codes for which color threads we're going to use. So we have DMC 701 light green and DMC 986 very dark forest green. We're going to start with the light green because that's the color that's in the center of our pattern. So you're going to get out your 701 and you're going to pull out about 2 lengths, roughly 36 inches. I kind of like to do a pull. My pulls are usually bigger than that. I usually pull from hand to elbow, but you know, you don't want too much because you don't want to get tangled up, and you don't want too little because you don't want to have to change your thread constantly. So once you've pulled out 2 pulls, then just kind of snip it. And there we go. Okay, remember this is 6-strand embroidery floss, so we actually need to just separate out 1 strand. So kind of rub the top between your fingers and then pull 1 strand out slowly. You want to be slow and steady with this. Don't yank it because they will get knotted up. So just pull out 1 gently and then you can set the others aside. So for 14 count Aida, it's common to use 2 strands. So we actually pulled twice what we were going to use so that we can fold it in half and just use a single strand as if it was 2 strands, because this is actually going to make it easier to start the project. So fold the 1 strand in half and then go ahead and thread your needle. I don't really know how to describe threading a needle to you, but you know, you put the thread through the eye of the needle, and Mom would tell you never lick it. I almost always lick it, so don't get mad at me, Mom. You're going to put the opened ends of your double thread are going to be closer to the eye of the needle, and then your loop end is going to be the farthest away from the eye of the needle. So let's talk about stitching. Before we go on the fabric, I want to show you on this larger piece of paper so you can have an idea of what a stitch will look like. The Aida fabric actually has little holes at the corners of where each stitch is going to go. So you're going to put your needle through the back of your fabric into your center hole that you figured out on when we folded your fabric. Then you're going to stitch up to the top right corner, and then you're going to come back from the back of the fabric down. So this will be the next. You'll go from down to the top right, then you'll come from behind the fabric into the next one. If you're doing a single stitch, then you'll just come back up to the other top corner, and that will complete your stitch. Now, if you're doing a whole row, you're going to go from the bottom left to the top right, come back from the back of your fabric to the top right, and then come back from the back of your fabric, and so on. And then once you've finished the number of stitches you want in one direction, then you can just go back from the back of your fabric to up here, then from the back of your fabric to up here, and you'll complete your crosses.
Hence, cross stitch.
Exactly. All right, now let's go on to our fabric. So remember, you're going to want to start in the center of your pattern and in the center of your fabric that we found earlier. So coming from the back, pull through one of the little holes, and then you're going to go down, remember, diagonally and up to the right to do your first piece of a cross. But don't pull your thread all the way through because we need to secure it in the back. All right, so see, you should have a little bit of your loop hanging out there, so if you pull it a little farther along, all you need to do is put your needle back through that loop and then pull it tight. And so there you've started your cross stitch without having to make an unsightly knot on the back. All right. Now that we've gotten it started in the back, we can continue that first row that we're stitching. So we're going to come through, remember that bottom right part of your first stitch, and then go diagonally and up to the right for the next stitch. And then do a couple more stitches just so we can get an idea of what that looks like. Remember, you're following your pattern here, so you're going from the center to the right. So you want to count how many of those green 701 stitches you're supposed to do and just count that number. That's why cross stitch is sometimes called counted cross stitch. Just for the purposes of this demonstration though, we're going to do a handful. And then once we've done a few, we're going to turn around and come back the other direction to complete our crosses. Ready to turn around?
Okay.
So it's very important that throughout your whole project you keep all your stitches going in the same direction. So all your underneath stitches should be pointing one way and all your on top stitches should be pointing the other way, because that will give the whole project like a smoother feel and it won't have like weird like bumpy looking bits where the stitches aren't going in the same direction. Now we're not going to be stitching all one straight line, so if you need to move to another row once you've completed your first row, you're actually going to move up to the next row with your needle. Instead of going through the bottom left because you've just gone through the bottom left to complete your stitch, you'll actually go through the top right and then go back downwards to the bottom left. And then to move to your next stitch, you'll move over to the bottom left of the next stitch because you won't have that same problem of taking your needle back through the hole. And that is how you move to a new row. Sometimes there'll be a spot on your pattern where there's maybe 3 or 4 stitches of this green and then you have to skip a stitch or two and move on because there's another color or a blank spot in between. So to skip a stitch, you literally just go to the next, skip over that place that you would be going for a consecutive stitch and just skip over one more place and continue stitching like that. Oh, it looks like we've skipped 2 for this one, which you'll have to do sometimes too. Now, another important thing to know is that if you mess up and go into the wrong hole and do a bad stitch, it is very easy to take out. You literally just have to take your needle and basically reverse stitch it. So put it back through the hole that you came through, and that'll pull out that stitch, and then you can go and put it in the right place.
And if by chance you happen to go 3 or 4 threads way past where you're supposed to go because you got carried away talking to the kids or watching TV, what you may have to do is actually pull your needle out and actually just pull those threads back through.
Kind of pick at it.
Pick at it, exactly. Because that's going to make it a lot safer for your thread because you're trying to keep your thread healthy as you stitch.
Okay, when you get to the end of your row or finish your thread or at the end of the color that you need, you're going to turn over your stitching. You want to go back the same way that you came, skip over one of the stitches because you don't want to loosen up your thread, and then you're going to kind of run your needle under 3 or 4 stitches after that first stitch you're skipping. And then pull your thread tight. I still struggle with this. This is challenging. One of the hardest parts to me. And then you're going to snip your thread pretty close to where the last thread that it came through there. And there you have a nice, neat, finished stitch. After you've finished your project, after you finish your 701 color in the center and do your 986 border, you're going to want to iron your project again. Again, you want to put a clean cloth down and you want to put your project face down on the cloth. So the stitches should be touching your clean cloth when you iron. That way you won't crush the stitches on the ironing board and you won't damage them with the iron. Then once you've ironed it, you're going to put it back into your embroidery hoop. Make sure you have it centered. And then we're going to cut a little bit around the edge so that we can stitch it to finish it. You want kind of not too much fabric that it's hard to work with, but not so little that it's hard to work with. So you want to be able to fold it over to the back side so that you can then sew it to itself, basically. Okay, so to finish our project, like I said, we've cut the sides around and kind of folded the edges over the back of the embroidery hoop. We have a length of 4 strands of embroidery floss. Instead of just a double strand, we have 4 strands. You're going to put a little knot at the end and then pull it through the fabric. And then just kind of stitch around the sides, I don't know, maybe ½ an inch or an inch apart, and just stitch all the way around, you know, up and down through this fabric, because we're going to like hold it into place, and that'll make it last for a good long time. Okay, once you've stitched all the way around, making sure it's nice and tight, knot it however suits you. Honestly, I'm not great at this part, and I have not really perfected my, knotting it to finish it, but just so long as it's tight and secure. Then snip off your extra thread at the end. And it should look something like that. If you have like a little extra fabric like this hanging out that you want to get rid of, you can always trim a little bit off of there. But no one's going to see that part, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so I hope that we have taught you something today. I know that it is very hard to learn cross stitch when you're not learning live from a person. If you're still having trouble, you can do all kinds of things. You can check out some books from the library. We have this Cross Stitcher's Bible. You can look for tutorials on YouTube. There's tons of stuff available there. MRL has a subscription to Creative Bug, which you can access to our website, and there's a few different cross-stitch projects on there. One in particular is a pendant where I think she does a very good job of explaining how to stitch, so that might be useful for you to check out. I really love this guy, Mr. X Stitch. He does some fun stuff, and he has some fun patterns too. If you really enjoy this and are looking for more patterns, you can check out some of these books from the library. You can buy them in craft stores. You can buy them online in places like Etsy, and there's all kinds of patterns out there for book lovers, for Star Trek lovers, for people who like landscapes. There's just all kinds of different patterns. So there's plenty more you can do. Do you have any more tips before we sign off, Mom?
Just to say that I taught Kristin how to cross stitch 3 months ago. She hasn't stopped. She's probably finished at least 10 projects, starting out simple and then working to more difficulty so you don't frustrate yourself right at the beginning, because it would be frustrating. But it's a great hobby, keeps you from eating. It's just the best thing you can do on a nice cold winter's night.
Until next time, happy crafting!